Good morning, folks. Excuse me. Welcome. I think we can get started in a couple minutes. We're still waiting for a few more folks to join in. But thank you all for being here this morning. Hey, Martha. Welcome. Thanks for trying out the chat feature. I feel like I'm still new to Microsoft Webinar. It's a different format than Zoom, so thanks all for joining. Okay, it's 10:04. I think we can start. Welcome, everybody. Today we are going to be talking about the Farmed Institution Market Development Grant. I will first introduce myself and then introduce my colleague, Rebecca. I'm Gina Clitheroe. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Farmed Institution Program Manager for the Agency of Agriculture. A lot of my work is managing a few different competitive grant programs, most of them state funded. And I am here. I'm going to be kind of like leading the webinar and am also your point of contact if you have any questions about this grant. And I'm going to pass it over to Rebecca. Would you like to briefly introduce yourself?
Yeah, so my name is Rebecca Brockett, she, her pronouns. I am a grants and contracts specialist here at the agency. So I'm going to do later a brief how to start your application in web grants. And then just know that, later down the line, if you ever have any technical problems in the system, that I will be your contact to reach out to for assistance.
So thanks, Rebecca. Okay, so to some logistics, I'm going to offer an agenda for this on the next slide here. We are using Microsoft Teams webinar, which automatically mutes and turns cameras off for everyone that comes in for the purpose of the recording. But we're going to open up for Q&A towards the end of the meeting. And you can also feel free to chime in and ask questions throughout. Just use the raise hand feature and then I can unmute you to invite you into the conversation. You can also feel free to use the chat. Be great to have kind of an active chat going during this meeting as well. And yeah, the session is being recorded, just so you're aware. The recording will be pushed up to YouTube and made available on the grant program webpage by tomorrow, in case it's helpful to look at this again. One other thing I want to note about this webinar format is that I'm using Microsoft Teams PowerPoint Live, which I'm not sure that everybody's going to have the same functionality if you have the Teams browser versus on your desktop, versus whether you have the Teams app on your computer that you're looking at this through, or if you're looking at this through your browser. I don't know that this functionality exists for both, but if you have it on the desktop app, then there should be some arrows that show up underneath the slides that I'm sharing right now. And you can either follow along as I'm clicking through, or if we move too fast and you want to look back at another slide or skip ahead to the end, you can just navigate yourself throughout the presentation. So the agenda for what we're going to cover, we're going to talk about an overview of the program, the purpose of the grant program, what do we mean by farmed institution, why is it important? And then we'll get into some of the details around the Farmed Institution Market Development Grant opportunity, which is currently open. And then we'll talk through the logistics about how to apply. I'll discuss some of the key application components, and then Rebecca's going to offer a web grants tutorial, which is the system that you'll use to submit your grant application. And then we'll have designated time for Q&A. But again, feel free to ask questions as we're going as well. So to start out, I wanted to offer some perspective as to why this grant exists and why the Farm to Institution program at the Agency of Agriculture exists. The purpose of this program is to ensure that Vermonters in schools, hospitals, and colleges and prisons and other institutions, we'll show some other examples on the next slide, to ensure that Vermonters in these institutions have access to nutritious and locally grown food. The Farm to Institution also increases market opportunity for local farmers and leverages the purchasing power of large, high volume, and very predictable meal patterns at schools, for example, to increase the viability and of Vermont farms by providing a consistent marketing channel. And then another benefit of Farm to Institution is promoting agriculture and agricultural literacy and community connection. So when we say Farm to Institution, we're really talking about the ability to support farms in selling more food to institutions, and building those partnerships, those relationships for long-standing market opportunities for farms. So the purpose of the Farm to Institution Market Development Grant is to focus on food producers' access to institutional markets and increasing the quantity of local food made available in Vermont institutions by addressing barriers in the supply chain. So kind of the dual purpose of this grant, and I'll try to circle back to this frequently throughout this presentation, is the purpose of this grant is to both increase sales for Vermont farms and then also improve access to local food for Vermonters eating in Vermont institutions. So some examples of institutional markets. A lot of the work that I do is with Farm to School and Farm to Early Childhood. The Agency of Agriculture gets an annual appropriation from the Vermont State Legislature for that specific institutional audience. But this grant program is unique in that we're also talking about additional types of institutions as well as schools and early childhood programs. So other examples of institutional markets include colleges and universities, hospitals, nursing homes, prisons, and potentially others as well. But these are the institutions we're talking about when we say farmed institution. So some of the details about the Farmed Institution Market Development Grant. At a high level, the eligible applicants are farms and food producers, producer associations and producer groups, and then supply chain facilitators, which is a complex word, but what we're trying to say is folks that are really geared at bridging those connections between institutions and farms or farms and other market channels. So some examples could be nonprofits or also private businesses, such as such as food hubs, economic development authorities, food brokers as well would be considered a supply chain facilitator, and this grant has funded food brokers in the past as well. The award amount, the award range is $10,000 to $30,000, and there are only $30,000 to award for this grant opportunity. In comparison to other grants at the Agency of Agriculture, this is a relatively small budget, which does make this grant, to be totally frank, it is a quite competitive grant because of that. And so we will only fund 1 to 3 grants per year. That being said, we're focused on a pretty specific type of project, and the application pool is usually reflective of that as well, in comparison to other grant programs that have a much more broad focus. We are really kind of drilled in on this market, and so this is the funding that we have available. The grantees will have 2 years to complete their projects. Again, either anywhere between a $10,000 and a $30,000 grant. The project timeline runs from January 2025 to January 2027. And the funding source for this grant is an annual appropriation from the Vermont State Legislature for the Local Food Market Development Grant. And there is a matching fund requirement for this grant. Matching funds must be at least 25% of the grant request amount. Cash and/or in-kind goods and services could count as match. And to be clear about what we mean by match, we're talking about any costs associated with a project that are above and beyond what the grant can cover. So for example, if you have a $25,000 project, the cost of your project is going to be $25,000. Then you would apply for a grant that's $20,000, and then your organization would need to contribute the remaining $5,000 as match, which would be 25% of the grant request of $20,000. And one other note here, the application deadline, it's published on our website and in our application materials. Just want to flag that that is going to be at 1:59 p.m. So it's a just note that that's in the afternoon. It's oftentimes we have had like 11:59 p.m. before. Just want to flag that this is not like an end of the day period. It's midday so that we have time to get applications ready for reviewers shortly after. These are some high-level details. If questions are emerging for you, do feel free to drop them into the chat or hang on to them, write them down, and prepare to raise your hand for the Q&A section. So focusing on eligibility, eligible applicants are farms or food businesses, producer associations, and supply chain facilitators. Eligible projects must increase sales for at least one farm and increase the amount of local food served in Vermont institutions and be able to be measured. Other notes on eligibility: eligible costs for this grant program include personnel costs, supply costs, equipment costs, and stipends. Most of these ineligible costs would be vehicle purchases, land purchases, and purchases made prior to award notice. So one of the core components of the application that I just want to raise now is the goals, performance measures, and expected measurable outcomes. This is part of the application, and in order to complete the application, you'll have to add at least 3 goals and performance measures to your application. And so just wanted to offer an example of what this can look like. So for example, if you are a farm and you're looking to sell more local produce to schools, for this project, let's say that you're focused on potatoes, then your goal would be to sell more local potatoes to existing school customers. Then your performance measure could be volume or dollars of sales. So it could be pounds of potatoes or revenue of potatoes. And then the expected outcome would be that the school purchases 100 pounds more or 25% more potatoes per month in comparison to the prior year. Noticed a typo there. And then another example goal could be increasing production efficiency with new equipment, and the performance measure would be like some measure of efficiency such as wash pack time, and being able to set a goal for what pack time you'd be gearing for as a result of the project. So production time could decrease by 1 hour per case, for example. So these are some examples of the types of measurements that will be required in the application and in the grant. The grant application also requires a project work plan, so applicants have to provide at least 5 project activities into their project work plan table. And all project activities must be completed within the 2027, by 2027, which would be the end of the grant period. So that's really important as you're building through the application. Make sure that any activities that you're doing and any outcomes that would be associated with that would be achievable within the 2-year timeline of this grant. Um, there's also a budget table, pretty standard for all grants, but just wanted to show an example of what that looks like. And note that any details relating to what anticipated expenses you would have would go under the details and purpose column. Um, you would account for your 25% matching contribution, at least 25% matching contribution here in this table, and then also indicate where that funding would be coming from, whether that's donated from another organization, or it's a grant from another organization, or it's a loan, or business accounts. That would be listed under the match source column. And just wanted to note as well for matching funds is that matching funds don't need to be secured at the time of application, but they do need to be secured by the time that the grant would be executed in January. So if you're in the process of obtaining another loan, for example, or um, other donations, then it doesn't need to all be in your hands at the time of application, but they should be able to be accessed easily if you were awarded, and you'll learn about your award in December in order to make the um, commitment for the grant agreement, which would start in January. I also want to flag that letters of support are optional, but highly encouraged for applicants. Letters of support could come from a local community partner, explaining the applicant's experience. They could come from an institutional buyer, talking about how that buyer is committing to buying the additional potatoes that a farm is going to produce, for example. Or a local farmer could also um, write a letter of support to an applicant, for example, like a supply chain facilitator, like a food hub. A food hub could apply and have a letter of support from a local farm to show that they're interested in growing their sales to institutional markets through that food hub, for example. Um, Other supporting documentation is also welcomed. We've seen quotes from farms about the impact of different programs. You could provide reports that talk about the need for the specific project that you're looking at that'll focus on farm to institution. Other supporting documentation would be allowed as well and could be uploaded there if there's not room to describe that work within the application itself. So that kind of brings us to the end of this application overview. At a high level, these are the different components of the grant application. There's going to be a section that focuses on the applicant information. There are some optional questions within there around demographics that you're welcome to complete or not. Then there's going to be the project description and impact. That's where you'll describe your project, describe your plans for estimated increase in sales, estimated increase in improvement in access, new markets that would be developed, or existing markets that would be expanded. And that's also where you will identify any key organizational partners that you're going to work with on this project if funded. And then those 3 components that I showed up that are fairly standard across Ag Dev grants, which is the division that this program exists within: goals, performance measures, and expected outcomes, project timeline, and budget, and then the optional letters of support and supporting documentation. I guess one piece that's not there, it's a very small thing to note, but maybe we can show you, Rebecca, when web grants tutorial is there's a standard form called the Act 154 Water Quality Certificate. And that is essentially like an attestation that every applicant needs to provide for all Agency of Agriculture grants that says that that organization is not out of compliance with water quality regulations. So the applicant needs to sign that to make that attestation and upload that to any grant application with the state, including this one. Sorry, with the Agency of Agriculture. I don't know what the process is for other state agencies that make grant awards. I did want to touch really briefly on application scoring criteria. So we talked through the eligibility at the beginning of this brief presentation, who's eligible to apply, what projects must do as a result. In order to be eligible, they have to increase sales or and also increase access to local food at institutions. And they have to be spent in these particular budget categories. But once applications are eligible, then that's when the scoring criteria comes in to say how are these applications going to compare to one another. And these are the 4 components of the scoring criteria. All the details around this, I highly recommend every applicant gets familiar with. Those are on page 13 of the RFA. When you apply, each application is reviewed by 3 different grant reviewers, and they use the scoring criteria to evaluate the applications. And then the Agency of Agriculture will host a review meeting with those reviewers that scored the application, and will use the reviews that were created and then the conversation that emerges as a result of those reviews and where those applications fall in order to make the review decisions. Speaking about the review process, one question that I've received before, that we receive often, is whether the agency or the specific program will do partial awards. For example, say there are like 3 really strong applications and the review committee wants to fund them all, but they're split about how to proceed. There have been times when the agency will do a partial award in order to fund more projects with a limited budget, but we do try to avoid doing this because then it requires the applicant to go back and kind of rework their whole budget around this smaller scope. And then we're looking at a totally different project than the review committee is looking at if it's fully funded. So we do try to only do partial awards if there are particular aspects of an application budget that the review committee or the agency is concerned about for one reason or another. Otherwise, we do try to do full funding of each project. But highly recommend, getting all the detail that you can into the budget so that the agency can kind of look at that and make those decisions. Let's see. Next up, I just wanted to provide this overview of the grant timeline with respect to grant payments. Again, this is a 2-year grant. The first grant payment will become available as soon as the application is submitted. And I'm just double checking the numbers that I put in here. Yeah, okay, these are actually not quite accurate. It's actually 40% of the total grant award gets paid out at the beginning of the grant once you sign your grant agreement in January. 40% of the award is then released a year later when you submit an interim report to the agency. And then the final 20% is available at the very end after you've submitted your final report. So I apologize if those numbers are inaccurate. This is copied over from a prior year. But all of these details about that show the real timeline and the current breakdown of grant award payments. This is all in the request for applications. So again, to apply, you'll visit the grant webpage, and the resources that you'll find there will include the request for applications, which is all the details are on this grant. There's also a link to the application portal that Rebecca is going to give you a preview of shortly. And then there's also a link to the Web Grants application guide, which Rebecca may also show or will drop into the chat at the end. There'll also be this webinar recording on the web page. So you'll go to Web Grants to submit the application, and we'll walk through all of the components of that application today. I'd recommend registering for Web Grants account as soon as possible if you don't already have one, because if you plan on submitting your application, you can't submit your application all in one day if you haven't registered for an account yet. It does take 2 business days in order to give you access to Web Grants. So if you're planning on, working on your application on, Wednesday, then you should definitely register an account at least on Monday, if not really. Actually, no, you should really register for the account like by Friday before, because it can take, a full 2 business days to get that registration processed. Okay, with that, I'm going to pass the floor over to you, Rebecca, to give a Web Grants walkthrough. I think you can just press take control is what I'm seeing as the instructions here. Nice.
I'm going to share my screen, which sometimes freezes for me for a minute. So apologize if we have like a little bit of airspace here, but I did put a link to the webpage for this funding opportunity in the chat. The RFA is one of the links towards the bottom of that page if you scroll down. Okay, so everyone should be seeing my screen now. So this is the landing page for Web Grants. If you are not yet registered with Web Grants, as Gina said, you'll want to register. That's that yellow button here. So if you click on that, it'll take you to the information to fill out. So first and foremost, it's going to ask you for your personal contact information. Any of the red font you see with an asterisk is required. Any of the kind of black font is not required. So you can skip those if you want. And then it's going to ask you for the information for your organization. Pretty standard. Don't forget to click on the CAPTCHA. We want to make sure you are not a robot. And then once you've filled out this page, you're going to just click on this green Save Registration Information. When you do that, it'll generate an automatic email to me letting me know that you have registered in the system. And then I will go in and approve that registration. It might take a day or two. We kind of say 2 days at the most, just to make sure that people are kind of aware of the time it could take, but we try to be much sooner. Once we approve your registration, you'll get 2 emails. One will have your user ID and one will have your temporary password. If you are already registered in Web Grants, but you can't remember your login information, there's a couple things you could do. So down here in kind of light blue, it's not too bright, but there's an option for forgot user ID. So if you click on that, you can enter your email address and submit, and that will prompt a return to you of your actual user ID for the system. And then once you have that, or say you already have that, but you don't remember your password, you can also reset your password. So to the right of that, there's a reset password option. And so if you enter your user ID and your email address and submit, you'll get a new temporary password. So say you've done that, you've logged in. This is the Web Grants landing page. If you have a temporary password you need to update, or if there's other profile information you need to update, in this gray navigation panel to the left, there's an option that's My Profile. So if you click on that, there's your basic information for your account. You can click on this green Edit My Profile to change any of that information and then save. Or you can reset your password by clicking this blue Reset Password button. And you'll enter your temporary password for your current password and then confirm a new password. And then down here below, this is just going to show any of the organizations you're associated to. So going back to our landing page. So in order to start an application, you're going to click on Funding Opportunities in the same gray navigation panel. And this is going to display all the current funding opportunities that are posted. Ignore the fact that we're also testing some. We do try and test to make sure they work before we release them to the public. So you're going to click on the funding opportunity you want to apply for. And then what it'll take you to is the basic information for that funding opportunity. So here it's telling you who the program manager is. And then it's giving you some kind of basic information. The same information is relatively available in the RFA. If you scroll down to the bottom, there is a link or an attachment, I should say, for the RFA in here. And there's also a link to the Web Grants How-To Guide and to the webpage for this funding opportunity. So now you want to start your application. You're going to click on this green Start New Application button. First thing it's going to ask you to do is come up with an application title. This can be absolutely anything, anything that you feel is relevant. So I'm just, for the purposes here, going to put test. And then you're going to click on the screen Save Form Information. The next thing that's going to be available to you is you could change your organization. So some people do have multiple organizations associated to their account. For example, we have some applicants that have a farm and they also have a creamery, and they might be separate legal entities. So there might be two organizations in the system and they want to select which one they want to apply for. So if you have multiple organizations that you are associated to, you can change that here. So you can either change it or not, and then you're going to hit Save Form Information again. And the next thing that's going to be available to you is to add additional contacts. So there might be multiple people associated to your organization that you also want to have access to this application. So this is your option if available to add them here. So if you click on this, it's going to open up this drop down. Where this tends to frequently come up is people will have sometimes consultants or outside grant writers that come in and help them with their application. So what I recommend is before you start your application, if they're already registered in Web Grants, have them reach out to us so that we can add them to have access to your organization. If they're not registered, you should ask them to register so we can approve them. And then they also still need to ask us to add them to your organization so that you can select them as an additional contact. You can always do this later. So if they are not already registered and they register later, if you reach out to us, we can make sure to add them and associate them to your organization. And then you can go back and edit and add them here, or we can. So you can add an additional contact or not. And then you're going to click Save Form Information again. Now this is going to take you to the application itself. So in the system, we have what they call components, or there are different forms for the application. I will say this little red section here always looks angry and makes people think something's wrong. This is not, nothing is in error. This is just saying your application isn't completed yet, because of course it's not completed yet because you just started it. So don't let that throw you off. So you're going to start clicking on the different components to complete them. You'll have to complete them all. You'll notice that the general information is what you just completed, and that's why there's a little green checkbox here and a last edited date. So I'm going to first start with the global application form. This form is static. It's the same for all of our programs and anyone who applies. It's just some basic information and then some optional demographics. So you'll complete, again, all the required fields. At the bottom, there is an option to do an additional anonymous survey. You do not have to do it. But if you would like to give us some additional information that's completely anonymous, you can click on this link to go to the survey and complete it. It's not at all connected to your application. We won't know who fills it out and who doesn't. But if you choose to, we thank you because it helps us gather some helpful information for our purposes. So once you've done that, you'll save that form. And then it's important as you complete each form that you mark as complete. That's that checkbox button that's orange. You're going to have to mark every form as complete before you'll be allowed to submit it. So just important to know. So say you've completed this one, you've marked it complete, or maybe you haven't completed it yet. You're going to come back to it. So it's in editing, but you want to go to the next form. So you can either, at the bottom of the page, there's these blue previous next buttons. So you could click on that and it will take you to the next form. Or up here, each form, there's a separate tab. So you could also just click on the next tab to go to the next form. So I'm going to go to the very next one, which is applicant information. And what I want to highlight here is this save multi-list, because it throws people off with some frequency. It's not quite intuitive and it's a little bit different. So we're already in editing mode. So say you're done that and you're completing these fields above here. In order to edit the multi-list, which you can see you can't do currently, you're going to have to save. And now you can edit. And to do that, what you're going to do is you're going to click Add New Row. You're going to complete the fields. And then you're going to click this green Save Row button. In order to, you can add multiple rows here. And so in order to do that, you're just going to complete those steps of adding a row again. And saving the row. And then if you want to edit any of these options, what you can do is you could click on one and then it's optional for you to edit, or maybe you made a row on accident, you don't want it anymore. You can also click on this red delete row button to remove it. And so you click on delete again. And now that row's gone. If you wanted to say edit all of your rows at once, you could click on this green edit all rows. And then it'll allow you to edit as a grid. So now I could edit either of these fields from here and save. But generally what you'll do for literally every other non-multi-list field is you'll click this green edit form button to edit. And I do want to highlight, because now that I'm seeing it, some times when you complete a yes no field, there are additional questions that will appear below that. So that's just something to know. Obviously you just click nothing else to, there's more fields to complete here. That's not always the case, but is frequently the case in the system. So again, say I've completed that one, I'm going to mark as complete, or if I want to continue editing, I'll continue editing. And the next one I want to highlight is attachment fields. So under letters of support, there are attachment fields. So if you want to attach a file, what you're going to do is you're going to click on select file. And it's going to open up, usually it's your desktop, sometimes it's your last used folder. But what you're going to do is you're going to search and you're going to find the attachment you want to add. And you're going to either select it and click open, or you're going to double click it. And you'll notice that the file name now appears in that field. So that means it successfully selected that, that document. And then to save it, you're going to click Save Form. And now that attachment is there. So you can see now it's in blue. It looks like you can click on it, which you definitely can, and it'll open up.
Rebecca, can I jump in real quick? On the attachment, I just want to flag that just be sure that the attachment type that you submit is compatible with all programs. So like a dot pages, for example, that's only compatible with Mac computers would not be a good choice for a letter of support, but a Word document or a PDF would be ideal. PDF is generally the best, I would say, but yeah, just no
PDF
pages
is king.
documents.
PDF is king. Word documents are fine. Excel is fine. Where we usually find issues if you're using like an Apple program and it's that strange .Mac or something. I'm not an Apple user, but that kind of very specific operating system type file is the system might let you think you uploaded it, but then we can't open it later. So just I would stick to generalized file types that are very common. And then the next one I'm going to go to this the water quality certification form that Gina mentioned earlier. Again, this is standard. It's required for all state funded grants. This is just saying that you're in good standing with water quality. You don't have any, in mitigation problems or something for which it's an issue. So you're going to hopefully select, yes, you're in good standing. And then there is a form you'll need to complete. So in order to open up this form link, you're either going to select Control and then click on it, or you're going to right click and open a new tab. You're going to want to do that because you're going to want to make sure that you don't open up the file in the same window, and then you might lose information here. So you're going to download and complete this form, or you're going to complete it electronically, and then you're just going to come back and you're going to attach it in the required field and upload it, which is the same thing we just showed you before. You'll select the file and then you'll save the form. I'm going to, so I can go on. So at any time, you can always go back here to your app list and see all the forms. You can see here, it's showing which forms I last edited. When this is all complete, you should have completed all of these forms and then marked them as complete, which is an orange button that we showed earlier. When that's done, under complete, you'll see a green checkbox for all of these. And then once that's there, there will be a new button that will allow you to actually submit your application. So say you've started your application, you've not finished it. I just want to kind of highlight that you can always go back to it. And so the navigation, so if you were to have just logged in, your new application, it's going to appear here under approaching deadlines. And so you can click on that application. And then you can click this green edit application. And so then you're back on your application lists. And so you can start doing the same navigation, which will be, click on these, complete them, etc. And just a reminder, there is that how-to guide. So that's was on the funding opportunity here in web grants. And this is, it's also on the web page. And so this just goes through the basic steps we just went through. But if you get lost, this is how-to guides available to you. The webinar is recorded. And then if you are lost, you can always reach out to me. I'm available by phone or email, and my information is in the request for application.
Thanks so much, Rebecca. I want to add just one more piece to while you're still sharing your screen. Um, so one thing to note about a common issue people will say is they can't submit their application. The major reason why they can't hit submit is because the submit button will not appear until that entire row, that entire column under complete is all green check marks. And if you can't get a green check mark on one of those forms, it's because the system will not allow you to press that mark as complete button until all required fields are populated. So just read the instructions really carefully if you're having a hard time hitting the mark as complete button. Read through the entries that you've put in so far and just make sure there aren't any blank columns, or, for example, when you're filling out your project work plan, there's a minimum of 5 entries into the work plan. So if you only have 4 in that multi-list, then you won't be able to mark that as complete, and therefore you won't see the submit button when you go out to this app details page. Great. All right. Well, thanks, Rebecca, for that overview. And I'd like to kind of open up if there are questions in the room. Oh, I did want to just show, I'm going to share my screen again because I made that typo. I just want to make sure we get the accurate image in the web grants, sorry, in the webinar recording. So the payment schedule is 40% upon award, upon signing the grant agreement, 40% after that first annual report is submitted in January 2026 and approved. And then the final payment is 20% that will be released at the end of the project after the project is done and the final report is submitted. The other thing that I didn't actually mention when I was looking at this page because I was so distracted by my typo, is that in order to get that first grant payment, in order to get the actual grant agreement to be executed, successful applicants that are selected will be notified that they are awarded in December, and then they'll be asked to send in some required documentation, which that required documentation includes a W-9 and a certificate of insurance. Grantees are also welcome to set up direct deposit at that stage, which can make the process of payments coming out a little bit faster versus paper check. But if you don't have direct deposit set up yet, then your first payment will be with paper check, but your subsequent payments could be with direct deposit. And the form to sign up will be sent out to folks that receive the grant. So just wanted to flag that there are some steps in the process after the award decisions are made before that first payment gets released, and wanted to show the accurate breakdown of the award. And for example, if you have a $10,000 grant, 40% of that would be $4,000. So you'd get $4,000 to start the project in January. Then you'd get another $4,000 a year in, and then the remaining $2,000 is held by the agency until the project is complete and the final report is submitted and approved. And each of those payments are also triggered by the grantee submitting a claim. So the payments are not automatic. They are requested in the system by the grantee, and they will be approved as long as each of these other conditions listed below are met. the status reports and the documentation and the grant agreements. All right, that was the only last thing I wanted to cover. Now I'd like to kind of open up for questions. Maggie, give me 1 second to figure out how to unmute you. All right. Maggie, I think now if you unmute yourself, you can speak.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. And sorry, everyone. My husband's doing construction work on the house, so that's what the banging is. I'm sorry. Uh, I work for a nonprofit food hub in Northern Vermont. We facilitate sales between K through 12 institutions and other institutions and local farms. We're doing some exploratory work and building some partnerships with the non-traditional college student sites in our region, like CCV, VTSU, and looking at some of their student support centers and wellness centers and meal sites for students. But we had one main question was when we are demonstrating potential food sales, I know that the grant money doesn't actually fund the food, but as we're just demonstrating those food sales, does the institution need to be the one that will be purchasing the food directly, or are we allowed to be the ones to, like, if we fundraise separately to cover the cost of that food, are we able to purchase food to supplement some of those student sites with local product? Does that make sense?
So are you asking about eligible project costs? You're talking about like project, whether or not the project itself would be eligible?
Project itself. Yeah, exactly.
If the project itself is going to result in more students at these college locations eating local food and more farms, increasing sales for local farms into a new market or expanding an existing market, then it would be an eligible project.
Okay. Okay. So it would be okay if the institution itself wasn't the one directly purchasing it. And we're still in the exploratory phase, so I don't have like the concrete bit.
Mm.
And that kind of leads to my second question is, do where this would be like on top of the work we're already doing, and we've started some of it, like just very initial discussions with these folks. Um, I know that the grant can fund staff time. So are we able to frame the project as like this is an exploratory, we're developing these relationships? Like, would it fund the staff time to initiate those relationships and formalize something? Or are you looking for like a concrete agreed upon formal plan?
Good question. I first want to kind of circle back to your first question and
Sure.
clarify that, yeah, so in terms of eligibility, what you described is an eligible project. The note would be to take a further review of the scoring criteria to make sure it would be competitive, in that the projects that are competitive are ones that demonstrate the viability for like a long-term market opportunity for farms. And so like a one-off supply of local food will be likely less competitive than
Totally.
a
Yeah.
long-term like sustained partnership that has that demonstration. And also just want to clarify that food is an eligible expense. So that's not ineligible for
Oh,
this program. Yeah.
oh, okay, cool.
Yeah. And then your other question, Maggie, was on whether or not you have to have a concrete plan at the time of application. And I think the answer is like yes and no. To some extent, we do need a project timeline. We do need those expected measurable outcomes in terms of like what's the goal in terms of the um, increase in um, local food that will be available, increase in sales for farms. Um, so there's some amount of planning that would be necessary in order to be able to offer those measurements for the application and to give some outline of the project. But the project timeline could absolutely include like a planning and development phase for a
Okay.
2-year project.
Okay, great. And again, it's something like we've already kind of started on our own, but the project would give us a lot more space to build up that capacity. So,
Mm-hmm.
okay, thank you.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Any other questions? Okay. If there are no other questions, then we'll wrap this up here, 10:58. Thank you all for joining us this morning. And oh, let me put up this next slide so you can see my contact info. Maybe I'll just drop it in the chat. gina.clitheroe@vermont.gov. Email me any questions. And then I also love a phone call, so don't hesitate to give me a ring. All right. Thank you all. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.